lot. It's good to be here. I want to apologize in advance. I just came off of a professional services gig out in California. Leave it to me to go to California and get rained on for a week and have 50-degree temperatures. This is me. I work for Shadowsoft at shadowsoft.com, and I also have my own website there. I blog a lot about Puppet. So if you want to dip in on some of that, I cover mostly beginner, basic, what's Git, how does it work, what are some commands I can use, that sort of stuff. So feel free to swing by there. I also plan on having kind of a synopsis, and some of the things I'll talk about today are going to be on there in my next post after this camp. So you can go out there and check that out. Like I said, quick plug, I work for these guys, and I do a lot of work for these guys. I do professional services both for us and for Puppet Labs around the country, hopefully around the world. Hear that, Puppet people? Tell them around the world. I'm interested. I perform all this stuff. I do bootstraps, I do consulting. If you want somebody to come in and tell you what you got, I do it. That's the most that they allow me to plug. I also have some of this stuff too, so talk offline about those things. Okay. Before we get started, this talk is for newbies. If you are a really advanced user, this is not for you. If you're doing stuff like this, they're going to be bored. If you're already using Puppet to this scale and to this degree, have some coffee, have some water, because we're going to get down in the kind of back to basics. I don't know if you heard it in the ether sphere earlier today. I was yelling, "Quit stealing my talk" in my head all morning long. People were talking about a lot of stuff, but these are all tools we're all going to use. So mainly I'm interested in everybody having a moment, especially if you're new, if you're only very, very early in the Puppet phase. Where are you today? What are you doing today? What have you implemented that could be implemented better? Maybe you've implemented some things and it's kind of this hairy mess. As Puppets go, maybe you got this guy. It's kind of hairy, has to be tied down, always a mess, trying to attack things when it shouldn't. Maybe you're in some kind of strange place like that. Maybe you got one or more guys that are, if it's just you by yourself, God bless you. I mean, that's a real hard situation to be in. Maybe you've gotten installed, maybe you've configured, maybe you've gotten some level of automation, maybe you've actually convinced the developers that it's okay to automate things, even though they want to remain hands-on. Maybe you're pushing code around through various old methods, like we heard about this morning, shell scripts and shared keys and cron-fired jobs that do this for you. Maybe you're developing ad hoc modules that many other people have developed. Excuse me. Maybe you're running scripts out there to check your syntax. Maybe you're pushing your code out to your Puppet Master and then you're trying to check syntax. Bad juju, as you heard throughout the day. Maybe you're only managing a few, maybe you're managing a lot of nodes. In any event, this guy over here is kind of what you're dealing with. Maybe you're even running tests in active dev environments. So we talked a lot this morning about, hey, who thought testing and testing in dev? Well, how about testing before you ever made it there? With pre-commit hooks, with post-receive hooks, things like that. I'll just chat briefly about that. What we want is this guy instead. He's kind of calmed down. He's a little more, kind of serene. He has a clearly defined development process, whatever works for you in your organization. Now, Gary Larissa is one of the Puppet Labs employees I am kind of a disciple of. I love all the stuff he writes. And one of the things that he talks about is when it comes to your organization, best practices are crap. In a lot of ways. I mean, think about it. When you are trying to implement this new whiz-bang workflow, if your organization is not there yet from a culture perspective, if they are not open to, oh yeah, let's continuously integrate the product. Well, if that's a best practice, then it's crap for your organization. However, we're always on this trajectory toward these, what I call nerdvanas. When you're heading in that direction, you want to have clearly defined development processes. You want to have centralized, repeatable, and shareable code. We've heard about all of this morning. We want to have code that we continually iterate against something, and if it's as it should be, the code does nothing. Item potency, the core word of Puppet Labs. It's centralized. You've got something that's on a Git server, that's on GitHub, that's in your own GitLab, that's in a GitLite, whatever you've got going. You want something that's shareable. Your data is not in your component modules. You want that to be separated, and you want to have the opportunity to be able to share that code and make the community better. You want to parse and syntax check your code before it's too late. In my world, whether it's a compliance world or a government world, public-private sector, military, that's before it ever makes it to dev. Because oftentimes, how many of you right now, if you said, oh, you know what, I'm going to go back to my office and take down a dev server, we'll have 2 or more people at your desk within 5 minutes saying what happened to dev. For me, for my world, the best practice of being able to test a dev is not, it's kind of crap, isn't it? I can't really do that, so I have to do that in a Vagrant-like environment like we heard from the guys earlier. So I want to have localized dev environments and virtualization, so I can push to a dev, a test, and a prod, so I can iterate against something that I'm working with whenever I get to a point that I consider to be code complete, that it's not failing, that then I can push it into a development environment because I am more than 80% sure that this is not going to affect my users. How do we get this guy instead of this guy? Well, these are the tools that I'm talking about in the title of the talk, and we've heard a lot about them this morning. I should have gone first, honestly, because everybody kind of expanded on what I have to talk about. We need to keep our code. We need to keep it in a centralized location. And back in the day, we all used Subversion. Subversion is talked to by R10K. So if you're in a situation, again, we're back to the best practices thing, the most recommended thing is Git. But if you have Subversion, R10K will talk to Subversion. It's not generally recommended, but you may have tens of thousands of dollars into a Subversion thing, and the business will not allow you to move. You may have to put Git hooks on the front of that. In this particular type of a thing, if you've used Subversion, you understand that there's a trunk, and that represents your latest stable release, as they talked about this morning. You work in branches, you branch off, you do various things and whatnot, and whenever you are code complete, then you finalize those features and merge them back into trunk. Well, when you do things like that, you're kind of limited to specifically the feature set that you're working on. Like, I'm not going to be able to branch off into such and push that to my live-side environment. I have to have a lot of other workflow goo in there to get me where I need to go. Git, on the other hand, allows me to directly map my branches to environments. Now, some of the folks that, there's kind of a conversation that goes on here. Some people say, well, you have to remember, when you're iterating to your puppet master. When your developers are iterating, they're iterating to environments. And really, you should have one, maybe at the most 2 environments for your puppet master, maybe test and prod, whereas your developers could have 10, 12, 14 environments. Depending upon your company, depending upon your workflow, one or the other may work. Don't not consider a workflow simply because your company doesn't work that way. Oftentimes, you have to have an intermediary step. Sometimes you have to tie branches all the way through. I've seen some sites that will have 6 branches going to the puppet master that follow all the way through to production. Some people describe their production customer-facing sites as application tiers, and they describe their puppet things as environments. And then they map all that together with R10K and build the workflow on that. The thing that I keep finding when I'm talking to customers is that it's so flexible to use Puppet, and it's so flexible as to how you can workflow, that these tools as abstractions of things you need to do can become necessary to be abstracted as well. And that's why we see all these tools coming out, the R10K tools and the other tools that we see out there. Git is really nice in that you can disconnect from the network and you can continue to work. So if you're using these virtualized environments locally, you can go sit in the park and you can work on your code and you can push it to your localized environment and do all your iteration testing, never connected. Linus wrote Git for the open source community, for the people who are working on the Linux kernel, who it cost them money to connect to the network and push code in. So when they could disconnect and do all their development and push their local repository, then when they connected, and only when they connected to the network, they could push their changes in or do their pull requests. That was much more beneficial to them and enabled them to be part of a great development workflow. And it is fast. It's really fast because it's on your local machine. The push to another server, maybe the parent server for your company or GitHub itself, is entirely dependent upon your link. But at least while you're iterating locally, you can use Git locally, and it is fast. As I said, Git is recommended. A lot of the various tool sets that we work with in Puppet is, it's based on Git. A lot of things assume Git. Take R10K, for instance, at the beginning it only worked on Git. It actually started backport and then add the support for Subversion later. Because I remember early when I was doing public consulting, I was kind of saying, well, it only works with Git. And then later on, as additional support was added, and that was this past summer, I believe, that for Subversion, then that opened up more options for my customers. And there's also add-ons and things where you can do Git-type commands at a Subversion repo. So there's a lot of things out there that, again, if you have a lot of collateral in that Subversion side, you can stick with that for a while. Next, you need to write your code. I'm keeping my code, I got a place to put it, now I need to write it to put it there, right? Well, I am old school, and primarily because when I started working on Unix, every platform, everywhere, always had VI. So when I started learning, that's what I had to learn on. That's the only thing that was ubiquitous, and getting information security allowed us to put anything else on our systems was a nightmare, so we just all learned VI. That's the way it worked. But you can use things like VI with syntax highlighting, with various types of syntax plugins and all these sorts of things. You can use Emacs. You can use Sublime Text, which is kind of one of the new players, or GitHub's Atom. That just came out not too long ago, and all of these different tools have methods whereby to check your syntax, to look at your code and make sure that you're doing the right thing. And of course, I can't leave out Geppetto. I wish it had a nice logo like the rest of them, so I had to take a shot of the screen here. Geppetto does all of the same things, and there's a lot of settings in there where you can say, hey, be aware of these style issues, and you can map it very closely to the style guide before you ever lint check it, or before you ever do a parser validating against the code. Also, like we were talking about earlier, I'll just go ahead and put them all up. You can use Vagrant plus Virtualbox, which is the freeway. You can use Vagrant plus VMware on your local host. And for instance, I'm working on a personal project where I have a Vagrant project. You literally clone the Git repository to your local machine. You go to the directory, you type Vagrant up. When you're done, you have a Puppet master. You have 3 nodes. All 3 of the nodes are development, testing, and production. The 3 nodes each, they have the master has the directory environments enabled, turned on, R10K is installed, and you're ready to go. They have Git clients in them. You can develop in your home directory as the Vagrant user on Vagrant, and you can push that stuff straight out of there, do a Git remote add repo, and point straight at your corporate repo and push into the repo. This is a great way to do the writing of your code and iterating into your Git repository all on your workstation. Like Ryan showed earlier, you can build a data center on your own machine. You need to test your code. Now, there's a ton of ways to test code. The big question, as we heard earlier, why don't you test? Why don't you write tests? There's multiple ways to write tests. Of course, we're familiar with syntax checking. There's the Puppet Vim project. There's several Puppet.vim plugins for Vim There's several plugins for things like Emacs and the things we saw before. You really need to check your syntax, and we'll talk about a couple of ways for that. You also need to test with the parser. Puppet parser validate file name. If you've written a Puppet manifest, and that Puppet manifest has all kinds of code in it, before you would ever try and run that in an environment anywhere, you want to make sure it runs. Well, you have the benefit that the Puppet binary itself will do that testing for you to a great degree. Yes, there's many other things that you could do. You could write other types of tests, which I'll talk about in a second, but these two alone will eliminate such a large majority of the problems that you could introduce into your site. You can't not do this. I don't remember how it was worded earlier, but just don't not do this. This is not just best practices, but this is pretty much the practice. You really need to test this stuff. The style checking, Puppet Labs has a style guide. This is the right way to do this. This is the right way this should look. When you're using variables, this is the way you should use them. When you're referencing things, this is the proper way to do that. You really want to do that with something like Puppet Lint. That's a gem that I believe it comes with Puppet Enterprise now. Or if you're running open source, you can just do a gem install of Puppet-Lint. Excuse me. And it will allow you to just run Puppet-Lint file name. And it will tell you, here's all your problems. Here's the lines that are too long. Here's are the things where you're making references, which we don't think are properly formatted. So Puppet-Lint is really nice in that it can pre-check all your things before you push them out. Git hooks. Git has the possibility in your local Git repo, if you do a git init, and now you have a Git repo, it creates a .git directory. You go in there's a hooks directory. You can make a pre-commit hook, which is not much more than a shell script that calls all this stuff we've been talking about automatically for you. Whenever you go to do a git commit, if it does not pass those tests, you don't get to go to the Git server, or to your local instance. The other place that you can put these Git hooks is at the server side, so your developers can do all that they need to do, whether they're sysadmins or whatever, but when it goes to push to the Git server, if it does not pass that checking, it does not get committed. That's a really good safety feature. I liked it so much that I modified my Mac. I have the GitHub binary in here. I went down into the binary and I previously set the pre-commit hook. So anytime I do a git init, it already has all these Git hooks installed. I don't write code that doesn't get checked. You can just do a simple no-op. If you're working in your local Vagrant instance, you can just do Puppet apply -p -minus no-op. What's this going to do? Puppet agent -t what did this do? What does this say it would do? How would this execute? If you're in the console, you can do a no-op against something. If you really like using no-op, there's a module on the Forge by Tom Lincoln that allows you to set the entire scope at no-op level. So if you're pushing to dev, say, I don't want it to do anything. Hey, Tom Lincoln's module, tell me what this is going to do. You can find that on the Puppet Forge. If you lean Ruby-ish and you have a whole lot more knowledge about Ruby than I do, you can start writing RSpec tests. There's a lot of documentation out there on the internet about getting set up for this, for doing your testing, to writing your tests, and how they work with Puppet. Puppet Labs also has a lot of documentation around RSpec testing, where you can get down into the nitty-gritty, especially if you're writing Ruby code in Puppet templates, not templates, in Puppet like factor, custom facts and things. If you're not using the facts.d methodology, that's kind of outside this talk, but just suffice it to say, if you want something known about your system, you can write a little snippet of code that can submit to the factor table, hey, this is something about this system, and then you can leverage that from your Puppet code. So let's say, you have a data center in Midtown and you have a data center in Alpharetta. You can actually say data center equals Alpharetta, data center equals Midtown. And then in your code, you can say, hey, if data center equals this, then do that. Very simple logic, but it's really powerful, especially when you need to be conditional like that. You can do environment-based testing. This is a little less recommended, but like place that I just went last week, They have an environment strictly for testing. They have built an entire parallel environment to their development effort, and this is for, I've always called these explosion servers. You can blow it up anytime you want. They have a mirror image of everything in their development environment explicitly for iterating to with something like Puppet. And they just test in that environment. If it clears that environment, then they go to their development systems, which cannot go down. They have tons of money, FYI. And again, local virtualized testing, which we've talked about a couple of times with the Vagrant. Whatever you do, test your code. Don't push code that hasn't been tested in some fashion. If it's as simple as no-op, if it's as advanced as RSpec, if it's in the middle ground as doing parser and style checking with Git hooks, if you manually run these the parser tests and you manually run Puppet-Lint against your manifest, please test your code. That will save you tons and tons of time and heartache, I promise you. So we need to move our code around. I cannot do the justice to R10K that you heard earlier, but I can talk about a few other things. Some folks use centralized resilient storage, third-party providers of mount points, NetApp filers, very expensive big pieces of Hitachi hardware, RAM sands, I mean, you name it. They're doing things where, my code is always in one place and everybody just mounts to it. If that particular master or series of machines goes away, it doesn't matter, something else is handling that. That's one way. That's also a good place if you start to scale, you can leave your certs there as well, and everybody can have the same certs. You definitely want to distribute your Git around. I'm going to quit looking down now. You want to distribute your Git around. You don't just want to have one Git repository. It's distributed version control for a reason. You want to have one here, maybe one over there. You want to geographically separate them. The more important your code is, the more important this becomes to you. If you have multiple sites, if you have multiple instances where you have working teams on different coasts or in different continents, it's really nice for them to have their local one and then setting up a synchronization between those through any number of methods, and you can find all that at git-scm.com. You can do masterless Puppet. Now, we've talked about today, a lot of people are doing it. I know for a fact that one of the companies I used to work for is doing it worldwide. They're doing it across all 24 time zones and then based on different criteria in individual time zones. They're able to be disconnected from home base so they don't have a master to check in with. Instead, what they do is they do a git clone every so often, and then they do orchestrated applies with implement, with MCO. So there's ways to do that. Some of the servers in this particular environment are running out of cron. They run a Puppet agent out of cron. Hell or high water, every time that time period passes, they run Puppet agent. So they're constantly making sure that they're always in a specific state. That's another way to do that. R10K, you got to move code around with R10K as well. I'm not going to go into it much further than we've already heard. R10K is kind of the current best practice for kind of mapping branches to environments, whether they be Puppet environments or development environments. R10K is the tool of choice. Some people are still doing scripted deployments. Now there's reasons for this. I've had a couple of sites that locations where they need to move things only become available when certain things happen that are out of Puppet's control, maybe a remote site, maybe a process control system, that a certain thing has to happen across a serial line and a certain temperature has to be reached before an event is fired and a disk mount becomes available. So when that disk mount becomes available, then they fire a script that in turn tells Puppet, hey, can you do a run? I've seen things like that before. So there are still cases where this is necessary. Obviously, there's a little bit more onus upon you, the system engineer. You have to figure out, okay, how am I going to fire this? How can I be conditional with this so I don't have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and press a button? And external tools. Sorry, I'm starting to fade here. The external tools that are out there, I mean, you've got Jenkins, which we've talked about, and we've got Maven, we've also talked about. And I knew last night when I was putting this image in here, I would totally forget the name of that project, and I've done so. So it's on the last page. When we get there, I'll tell you what that project is. Gradle, thank you. Whenever possible, automate. Automate, automate, automate. One of the biggest boons to my career before I became a full-time puppet sort of person is that I quit having to wake up in the middle of the night. I quit having to manually do things, which was done exactly the same way by run books every single time. The general rule of thumb when I go into sites who are asking me to do consulting for them is, how do you do your deployments? Oh, well, we follow this sheet here. I said, then you can automate it all in Puppet. And they're like, well, no, we can't. And then when you demonstrate to them in a small local virtualized environment, oh, yes, you can. It's like, it's world changing. And as you start to kind of get a grasp of everything Puppet can do for you, these sorts of tools, I use Jenkins the most. Great example, the city of Austin has a situation where their code is distributed in RPMs. So they have Jenkins watching a GitHub repo that has all the code. The second they commit their code, the code gets sent through Jenkins, an RPM gets generated, it gets sent to the Yum repo, create repo is run, and then they increment the number for latest. The great example of a way that if you have something that's not mission critical, that it gets deployed by RPMs, it's very straightforward, and it's really automated. Instead of you having to do all those steps that are precisely exactly the same every single time, you can have Puppet do that for you. And of course, you got to share your code. You don't gotta, but you really should. I mean, this is an open source project. Even though there's an enterprise component, this is our culture. This is how we do things in open source world. You got the Puppet Forge, you got a lot of gurus up there writing a lot of code, and you can learn a lot from them. But if you solve something in a really cool way, if you have done something new that you haven't seen somewhere before, share it with everybody else. If you're using Hira for data lookups, there's no company identifiable code, there's no code in your modules that can give away the farm, as it were. Share it with us at Puppet Forge, and lo and behold, somebody may take it, oh wait, you can do this better, and then you will benefit from their changes to your code by pulling it back into your company and doing things better. Everybody's here to help each other. You can enable this by using Hira to store your private data, and be sure to use Forge modules too. Why does there have to be 800 Apache modules out there? Why does there have to be thousands of Apache modules out there? The Puppet Labs Apache module is fantastic. It's been around long enough now. There's very few bugs in it. The bug list is short. It's a very active project. People are constantly saying, oh, we could do this a little better, we can do that a little better. Why rewrite that? Instead of spending however long to write it, spend however long to learn what's there. And if you think you can do something better, expand upon it, be a part of the community. And in conclusion, like I said, this is a very beginner sort of thing. I want to kind of expose a lot of the stuff that was available, but all my thunder was stolen throughout the day. If you're going to do this thing, don't fall for the buzzword DevOps, but think about development operations. Think about doing operational things with developers' methods in a best-of-breed sort of way, to be repeatable, centralizable, rollbackable, which we're all interested in that, and things that you can share with each other, and we can make the community better, and everybody benefits. So I think that's, There's many dev tools out there. There's a ton of documentation at Puppet Labs. It's the most complete documentation on any project I've worked with. There's a huge community. We talked about the mailing list earlier today, the IRC channels. There's even a developer mailing list. If you want to do a poll on the actual Puppet code and work on that, you can do that as well. Go to PuppetConf. I just got back from PuppetConf. It was fantastic. It's going to be in Portland next year, and they're supposed to show us where all the great beer is. Go to Puppet camps like this one today. You don't have to just go to Atlanta. I know it's closed, but there's going to be other Puppet camps around, and it runs on the marquee in between talks. So you can check out some of those as well. Network with people when you're here and share. If you're in similar businesses, maybe you met somebody today, and they have a problem that you've already solved, make sure all your data is inherent and share your code with them. They'll return the favor. Network across each other. We talk about these things at the Public Users Group all the time, that we really need to network and we really need to share. We've been hosting it at Shadowsoft for a while, and anyone's welcome. We do use the meetup group list, so we'll be putting that in there so that you guys can know when to come. Come and join the list. Let's kind of reignite get the group going. We have free food, we have free beer, and we talk about a lot of cool things and we network. So please do feel free to come to that. Thank you. And does anybody have any questions?
There's a... I figured there was one.
Oh, sorry. It's hard to hear in the back.
Looking at some modules on Forge, there's some other kind of testing that a lot of them are talking about doing that seems to, I'm guessing it's using RSpec plus a Vagrant or something. What is that one? Can you say anything about it?
Well, definitely RSpec. A lot of the tests are RSpec, but there's also a section, I think I'm linked, to testing for public modules. It's a very simple method where you say, do this in your module, and then in your test say, this should do that, and check to make sure that it did that. And it's a very basic, straightforward way of doing that, but you can get really detailed. You can write total Ruby. And like I said before, that is way outside my experience set. The extent of the Ruby that I've written is that there's this shell escape that you can run bash in, and that's what I do. And I get stuff out of it, but if it's a one-liner with a quick set to get a value, and I don't know Ruby, it's a very quick way to do that. I do know that there's, in my links here, which I believe that they're going to put these up sometime soon, I have a link to RSpec testing for the newbie. It's a straight up Ruby website, but it's a really good place to get started. And if you search for Ruby at docs.puppetlabs.com, you'll get a lot of information on that as well. Anyone else? Jan, you're fired. No.
Sorry.
So you talk about using Jenkins
Yeah.
for target testing.
Yeah.
We have VMware and Jenkins.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I do the testing there? I spawn up a new VM, testing the public code, and then if the code is successful, then I'll kill it.
In your case,
Yeah.
a specific use case for Jenkins, everybody, Jan took over my job after I left there and went to Shadowsoft. In your case, the part where we create the RPMs for all the software, that's where you want to do that, because that will automatically create the RPMs, and you can even have it go do a workflow where it puts it in the Yum repo and automatically runs create repo. So the second the devs have told you this is released, instead of you having to do anything manually, say, okay, hold on a second, yeah, it's already in the Yum repo, you can leverage it now. You can go and you can update your version in your manifest. They say ensure version 1 or whatever version it happens to be in whatever of those products. You can do it that way. For them, since they're only using that tarball and extracting into those locations, you can iterate from there and you can have Jenkins do that workflow. Just take all this code and put it over here. And the Jenkins website has a lot of really good documentation on how to do exactly that. But I think that's your two best use cases at your organization.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
Does your site, questy.org, does it have a how-to for like the absolute, I've never used this before, how to get up on Git, or do you have a link to it in this? Or?
I do. Where I am right now is I started out writing a point-for-point how to install open source. And I got kind of, not chewed out, I kind of laughed at a little by some folks on like one of the sysadmin, I'm a Lotsa member as well. There's like, wow, you mean other than using the Yum repo and just installing? I said, yeah, but there's a lot of integration post that. You got to put in the console. You've got to, if if the web server is not powerful enough, you really want to put in something that can handle that. Yeah, and all of those steps would have been about January of last year. I just went point for point through that entire thing, how to do the entire open source installation. And then since then, I've been doing a very detailed version of what we're talking about here. What is Git? How does it work? What are the Git commands? How does this help me? There's been a series of articles over the summer, and the sad thing is that I've been working so much that I haven't had a chance to write blog posts. But there's Vagrant in there. I'm in the middle of telling what Vagrant is and how it works, how the Vagrant file is designed. I mean, imagine guys, you have a single file, you edit a text file, you type one command and it creates an environment. There's nothing like that. We didn't have that 25 years ago, right? So you can check out all that. If there's anything you want to learn about, hear about, see, I can certainly cover it. And then we talk about a lot of these things at the user group as well. So definitely check it out and then email me. My email is on this presentation, which will be at the site. And email me at the office first. If you know anything there, also email me at questy.org and I'd be able to help you out.
Can you put the slide with your addresses back up?
Yeah, sure.
So I have really good news, actually. Four of the 6 slide decks from today, I think, including yours, are actually already up on the site.
Okay.
I just found out. I'm not sure if yours is up there, but
I got a thank you about 30 minutes ago.
that it's there. So it's if you find the Puppet Camp page, you can go to puppetlabs.com/puppet-camp, but honestly, if you just Google search it, it's faster.
Yeah, it's already there.
And then you click past camps, and then you'll see presentations for Puppet Camp Atlanta. So you can check those out right now.
And this is in there as well. This is all the stuff I've been talking about, all the stuff we've been talking about throughout the day, and links to my site, information specific to Hyra, the Forge, Gradle, Maven, Jenkins. Yeah, that's where I was going to cheat on Gradle. And the no-op stuff, exactly how it works. And I also included Tom Lincoln's no-op module. There's the RSpec stuff, all the Vagrant do, and I've got a bunch of Vagrant stuff on my site as well. And I'm continuing to develop that, so it continues to grow. But the more I learn, the more I experience, I update the stuff and try to keep it accurate and current.
Any other questions? Okay, cool, excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.